Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Hey, Ken, let's talk about desire mismatch or desire discrepancy
Discrepancy,
or
yeah.
mixed desire relationships, something like that. What do you think?
That's a good one because we've had multiple conversations in the year of opening around this.
I talk about this all the time. It feels very normal to me to talk about when desires don't feel aligned, because it's just a normal part of my job. But I notice that there's a lot of shame attached to it for a lot of people, and I'd like to let's take that apart a little bit. Let's see if we can
let's do that.
take apart the concept and see if we can destigmatize it a little bit. Yeah, so right off the bat, even the language around it, right? It sounds a little pathologizing.
Right, yeah. As we were starting off, you were coming up with different kinds of phrases to find one that didn't sound like it was going to ping off of somebody's shame or
But
stigma. Yeah,
but the thing is, there's a difference between pathologizing and trying to find a name for something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to say my goal is to have a conversation about what happens when any two people or more people have differences in either the intensity or type of wants that they have, what they want out of their life, what they want specifically. We often talk about either what they want sexually or what they want in a relationship structure or style, how they want to orchestrate their relational life. That's what comes across my radar. But as I say that, I think, hey, remember when we ran that CrossFit gym together? We watched people deal with desire discrepancy all the time. All the time. One part of a couple would come in. It was mostly monogamous people around us then.
Yeah.
One part or both would come in, but only one would drink the Kool-Aid and be into the whole scene. And it would cause over time disruptions because all of a sudden one person is showing up for a workout that's going to last for an hour plus the driving there and then the cool down and then driving home. So all of a sudden their day has 2 hours out of it, and CrossFitters never fucking shut up. We will talk about our pull-ups.
That is true. Yeah.
So much. So there it becomes this gap, this like, oh, we don't desire. And I've seen the same thing happen with people who gain anything that they're passionate about, right? We can create this gap between myself and this person who I am partnered to, because now we want different types of things or we want a different intensity of the same thing. Because a lot of the people I'm talking about when I think about CrossFit days, I think, so one of them came in and found out that what they like is to basically beat the crap out of themselves for an hour. And it felt good to them. They got an endorphin rush. It also, there was status stuff. There was in-group, out-group stuff. There was lots of psychology behind why it feels good to be part of a cult. And then sometimes their partner was like, yeah, I'm perfectly happy to exercise, but I'm just going to exercise.
Yeah, I just want to
go for a run for a minute.
Fool around for a little bit and then go home.
It's good. And so it's not that they didn't both like exercise. They did, but they liked it differently. They wanted to inhabit that experience differently. And that to me feels so on point for how, we see people get into these adversarial positions with each other, right? Then one person is defending their right to like what they like, the intensity of it, the style of it, the type, and the other person often gets into an equally sort of defensive position. And so I think rather than pathologizing because something's wrong with like the actual mismatch, mismatch is normal, it happens all the time. What we do with it, though, is going to have a lot to do with how it feels to be in this particular relational container.
Right. And I'd like to bring into the room right now the idea that it's not a fixed thing. Like you said, so yeah, my desires change moment to moment.
Right.
So how well our desires align depends on the moment, depends on context, depends on so many different things. So it's not just a question of um, do we both like the same thing, as though that is now answered and true forever. Things
Right.
change, people
So,
change.
yeah, the idea that we would always be perfectly in
Yeah,
sync, especially when we're talking about what we want out of our sex or our relationship or like organization, the idea that we would be perfectly in sync all the time. I mean, for one thing, sometimes you're going to have eaten a bunch of ice cream
yeah,
and you're lactose
yep.
intolerant and you might not want to have sex. Does that qualify
Does
for
that
desire
qualify?
mismatch? If I'm like super horny and you're like, I feel a bubble, like I don't think that's usually what people are thinking about. But I have seen and I have felt myself like even like a little wobble away from alignment can start to feel we can like brew it up in our minds like,
Yeah,
oh,
we
this is a
can
problem. This is a problem.
start making meaning out of
Yeah, the narrative
the
we
narrative.
tell,
Hmm.
the meaning that we make out of the situation will have so much to do with how it winds up playing out. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, talking about the different ways that we can even discuss desire, like
Hmm.
I think right off the bat, when I'm thinking about desire, I immediately start thinking about the dual control model of desire. So when we're talking about sexual desire in particular, when Bancroft and Jansen's work came out, I think it kind of just sat in the background for a little bit. And then a human being named Emily Nagoski and her impeccable pop science writing, she pulled those studies from Bancroft and Jansen out and said, hey, you know what, everybody, we need to understand this, especially people who are in heteronormative, especially mononormative relationships. We need to understand what the dual control model tells us about desire. So, if you're not familiar with Emily Nagoski's work already, I think she has translated the dual control model in a really legible, awesome way.
Yeah,
You
very
can consume
accessible.
it in her books, Come As You Are, and then again in Come Together, which is brand new, just came out this past January. And she also has some TED Talks that are really well done and some great podcast episodes out there. So, I'm not going to go super into it, but the bottom line of the dual control model is there's more than one way to be interested in sex. It's just some
Yeah,
of us
that's
have spontaneous desire, some of us have what's called responsive desire. With spontaneous desire, you just get horny sometimes. You see a thing and you're like, I could fuck that. Here's how I'd want to fuck that. Sometimes some people though have more responsive desire. Responsive desire is more like I could get in the mood to respond to something. I could get in the mood. And at that point, some desire would ramp up. And those aren't two, that's not like an on and off switch. I think of them as a spectrum somewhere in there. Like I'm a little bit more on the responsive side at this point in my life. I was a little bit more on the spontaneous side in my 30s. Eh,
and so right away we see the great potential for differences in desire from person to person, from moment to moment.
Right. And when we're talking about desire discrepancy in a mononormative paradigm where we've centered the idea that monogamy is the norm and so you need to get your sexual needs met by one person, desire discrepancy starts to feel real intense real fast. Would you like to speak to that? It seems more like your area of expertise.
Yeah, with it. I have not approached my relationships from a strictly mononormative point
Not
of view,
mononormative at
but
all,
nonetheless,
but lazy.
yes.
No,
Let's
I mean,
not.
you have been like not willing to go out and do
Right.
the work of
Yep.
meeting other people. So even though
I mean, there are.
you were technically available, you went for whole years where you also just weren't putting in any effort to find anyone else.
Right.
So you had this like mono bubble around you for periods of time where you weren't having your sexual needs met.
There are a lot of reasons why someone might put all their sexual eggs in one basket, uh, and the and when that happens, there's just the potential for desire differences to magnify, to be really, really highlighted, it goes way up. Like, oh,
Right.
okay, so now I'm finding that my desire isn't lining up with my chosen partner's uh more often than I would like.
Which I gotta tell you, that is such an exquisite way to self-flagellate. Like
Oh my goodness.
like,
Oh,
so
the opportunities
as a
for
person who had
uh
a lot of shame around sex, you
mhm.
created this beautiful scenario where you, technically speaking, had all the rights and privileges to go out and have sex with someone else. But because you also had a whole lot of sexual shame, you could kind of molder in the
Yeah.
in the ick of, my needs aren't being met. I feel sexually misaligned with my partner. And that must be, and I remember hearing you talk about how like you making meaning out of, like, oh, what I want is wrong, right? It
Right.
doesn't align
Yep.
with this person who I'm supposed to align with. So now I get to double down on my self-shaming. And
Right.
I see people all the time imagining that their desire discrepancy is entirely like innate.
Yeah.
Like they're carrying it around with them. I'm like, it's only, first off, we can only recognize a discrepancy if there's more than one data point. Like that, we
Yep.
literally need to
And
have
if
two
I'm the
people.
higher desire partner,
Right,
then I can very like it is no effort at all to turn that into a story of I'm unwantable because
right.
they don't want sex as much as I do. I must be bad.
And
There must
I
be
was
something wrong with me.
right. I was the higher desire partner in my first marriage, and you were the higher desire partner in your first marriage.
Mhm.
So we're both now totally screwed
Yeah.
because we have to
Oh yeah.
fight. We have to play tug of war because both of us want to feel like shit because we're unwantable.
Right.
So that's like a basic premise is like each of us have a core wound about being, something's off, something's unwantable about us, but we're actually pretty well aligned by and large in our
Yeah, so we
desire.
have to we
So we have
do.
to invent, we have to get really creative. And I see people do that all the
Compete
time.
to be the one who gets to beat themselves up about being unwantable.
Right. I see, like, but I see this all the time. Some desire discrepancy is really about um not understanding how desire works, right? So we should definitely, yeah, read Emily's books, understand how desire works, understand how to facilitate desire over time in yourself and in your partners. But I think it's really interesting that desire discrepancy can continually fuel this shadow quality that I have, this this core ick that clearly some part of me likes feeling,
Mhm.
because I am with a partner who is an anchor partner. So somebody I have lots of access to and lots of time with, who does want me. And I still make that story up about myself, like I'm unwantable. So clearly, some part of me is getting
Right.
off on that. And now we could have a whole conversation about shadow work and existential kink. I think let's table that,
Yep.
and we'll do a whole episode on that, because I'm actually certified as an existential kink coach, which is kind of ironic because I'm a Jungian psychologist. I really didn't need that, but there are some helpful techniques. So if you hear yourself reflected in that, keep your eye out. We'll do another episode on
And there,
doing the shadow work around,
this
around
also
your desire.
this also dovetails into our NSI training. Um, so I'm noticing that right. So in my first marriage, I was the high desire partner. So when I felt like my sexual desire wasn't being matched, it would start negative self talk.
Mm.
One of the things that inspires negative self talk is actually the fight reflex from anger. So I was, and you have mentioned this in previous podcasts about how previous episodes, how I was um, very like nice, right? I don't make a lot of like active trouble. I don't
You are
start
very nice.
fights. I don't get angry very often on the outside, but lots of stuff makes me angry. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't be angry. So I won't be angry. Instead, I'll just take this fight reflex and just yell at myself. So
A strong inner critic is a
I'm a
sign of
strong inner
the
critic.
of
is
the
a
fight
sign
response
of
turned
the fight
inward,
response. And
right?
so I wasn't getting the sex I want, made me mad. I was angry. I didn't want to bring it out. I kept it in. Now I'm punishing myself.
Is this where I can also just add in that she knew your first spouse, she knew you were angry. Uh,
Right.
so you weren't doing a great job of
Oh, no,
keeping it
no,
in.
no. I mean,
I
no,
mean, she
but,
and I were friends for a long time. She knew you
but,
were angry. And that's where the like when we try to stuff that stuff down,
oh
it
yeah, it's
doesn't
going to come
go
out
anywhere. It
sideways
comes
a
out
bunch of different
sideways,
ways. So yeah, I wasn't doing what I characterized as classic anger. So I must be succeeding. Except
right?
there were all these other things that were happening that were unpleasant for the people around me. Okay, but I didn't think I was acting angry. So in addition, I had my fight reflex turned inward, multiplying that feeling of I must be bad.
So I appreciate that we're talking about the different ways that desire differences can feel icky.
Hmm.
And that's what I
Yeah.
mostly see. I see people feeling icky and wanting to fix it. And one of the ways that I see people try to fix it is by saying, I'm going to get these needs met by opening my relationship. There is
Okay.
discrepancy.
Hmm.
Someone wants different type of connection, intensity of connection, a different timing of connection, a different frequency of connection, a different context of connection. Um,
And I've heard people ask the question outright. So if I open up my relationship, will that help me deal with this desire
right. And I mean, I think a
difference?
frank answer is it could, but not necessarily. And I
Hmm.
think again, we have a great example of that because
Yeah.
I showed up in your life, horny as hell, and specifically aiming so much energy at you. And that didn't stop you from wanting sex with your other partner.
Right. Because
Not at
it
all.
did
That
not
didn't cut
address.
that,
I was still trying to equalize that mismatch.
equalize that mismatch. What
I
an
was
interesting
trying
way to
to
put it.
inspire. I
Yeah.
was still
There
trying
was
to
still
get
something
the
you wanted from
desire
that
from her.
particular
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Right. And so that I think that's a really important point that is not talked about enough. In this season, we're doing other episodes on getting our needs met and on um, what it even means to have your needs met and hoping your partner changes and all of that. So this stuff will all fit together. But the idea that when you get a need met by another person, that doesn't mean that you won't still want that need met from the original person. I
It does not mean that. Yeah.
sometimes so sometimes it does. Sometimes I have seen people do some really beautiful things around saying, you know what, we actually don't align. Let's just look honestly and feel through this. Hey, we don't align, whether that's sexually, whether that's in some other way. But hey, you know what we do? We do still, we like maybe we love parenting our children together, or we run a business together and that's going really well. Or, you know what, I like living with you, but I don't know whether I, yeah, I don't know whether I want to co parent with you. Like there are a million ways we can align or misalign. But I see so frequently that someone will go, they'll make a new connection and think, "Great, now I have that need met." But you aren't you're not a need pinball machine, or
Right.
I don't know what the right analogy is. Like you it's not like your need cups just get filled up. Like, okay,
No.
so you
No.
need to
There.
have sex. Okay. No, your needs are contextual
Hmm.
inside of a relational dynamic.
Right.
And so I think of you back then as it was confusing to me because I knew that you had not had sex for 6 years with that person. And I knew that you were mad about that. And I knew that it wasn't working for you. But I also reduced it down to being about the sex.
Hmm.
But it was never about the sex, not
No, it
really.
wasn't. And you said something a minute ago about the theoretical situation where Two people can be saying, okay, so we've got this relationship, and our sexual desires don't line up, and the difference is significant enough that maybe we could, maybe we can let's talk about it. Let's agree about what we're going to do about that. And there it is. Let's talk about it.
Right.
Because you know what I never did?
Mm.
Talk about it. So if, so I kept going back, even at there, you were definitely providing me with all of the sexual energy that I was looking for,
Well, I was keeping you busy pretty much all of the hours that I could get your pants off,
but I was still looking for something from her.
which,
Why? Because we'd never had the conversations where we said, so are we gonna, like, what are we doing here?
like, are we retiring this
Are we
part of our
retired? Because,
relationship?
yeah,
And
and
then,
without that conversation, it's just this void.
this episode's now going to tie into another episode from this season about justice jealousy, because that actually
Mm,
was an interesting piece of the puzzle, because I watched it as I started to fill your sexual imagination over time. It inspired justice jealousy, because let's be clear,
yeah,
I'm certain her needs were not being met by you either. While you were the high desire partner, like, that's just silly to think that, like, there are reasons behind that.
right.
And to imagine that, mm, you have the you had the experience of then watching her desire go up, but then the two of you still didn't want to have to talk about the thing.
Yeah, uh-huh.
So the medicine, the primary medicine for desire differences, is actually talking about it, and over a sustained period of time. It's not a one-time conversation,
No, no, it isn't.
because we're unpacking our shame. We're
Yeah,
unpacking usually years of not talking about it,
yeah.
at least months. And often we're we're having to come to terms with who we are at the same time that we're trying to make ourselves legible to our partner. So now I'm trying to figure out who
Mm,
I am, how I
right.
have changed, and now how do I communicate this sense of me? And now my partner is over there trying to figure out, okay, hey, that's not who you said you were. And sometimes there's a lot of
Right.
resistance. Like,
Yeah.
wait,
Wait a
you
minute,
changed
but
the
this is
rules.
this
What's
is bait and
happening?
switch. Hang on. Yeah.
Right. And all relationships are, because we change.
Yeah. Right.
We we can't promise not to change,
So these conversations they're complex, and they're ongoing.
and they're
And
ongoing. Right.
and there are, like, you may find yourself resolving one particular complexity. Great. Good job. Now on to the next one,
Right.
because we're humans. We are complex.
Yeah. So one of the things that I usually ask people, if they say, okay, so I want to address this desire difference by opening up, um, I want to ask them, so how are your conversations now? How do you
Mhm.
talk about these differences, and how do you talk about all the other aspects of your life? If you think about, across the board, a lot of times people will tell me, we're great at communicating. We're awesome at communicating. And then they'll come into the year of opening, and I'll start asking them to have intentional, introspective times with themselves, and then intentional conversations with each other. And I'll model those conversations with you, because you're present in every cohort. And I'll model the conversation, and then they just don't. And a few weeks will go by, and I'm like, yeah, you were good at communicating about the things you were good at communicating about. And you thought that
Yeah.
that was it. That's what there was. It's all the stuff that
I mean,
you didn't talk about, and all the
I
stuff you
am a
didn't.
middle-aged white man. So if I wasn't good at it, it's probably not worth being good at. Sorry,
Ah.
everyone.
Okay, so but you need to have the
Yep.
conversations that you don't have.
That you don't
The
have.
ones that you
Yep.
actively avoid, those conversations.
Yep. The
But
ones
you're
that you make assumptions about instead
but you're
of.
also gonna need to have the conversations you don't know you don't have.
Mhm.
And that's exactly why we do the year of opening. It's exactly why, when I'm working with people in private coaching, I facilitate every one of these conversations, like, or at least getting them started. I facilitate those conversations. But even then, I can't have the conversation for you. and I can't do the introspection for you. I can draw you out. And so there is a level of coming face to face with the monsters that got you where you are. And those monsters aren't your partner. They're inside you.
No,
The
exactly.
shadow work that is involved in facing whatever it is that you've been either unwilling or unable to talk about openly. It's enormous, and it's also a huge gift to yourself. Even if you were to take this out of the relational context, the
Yeah.
self-awareness and this and the
Hmm.
capacity to know who you are by having these conversations can't be overstated.
That is some major self care right there.
It is. It is. And then we have to actually get into like, so what kind of differences can be addressed? And like
All right.
in my experience, like almost any difference can be addressed while maintaining um, a relationship of some type. But often we have like there's an imaginary line. It is quite literally it's imaginary. We imagine it. We imagine this is what a relationship, a partnership has to include. It has to include these things. So we have to be willing to do the work of having hard conversations, but also reimagining what we think a relationship is.
Okay.
I
Right.
There's a couple that I worked with for quite some time who really struggled because they seemed to actually have a lot of alignment, tons of alignment, but they were really struggling because they had this like imaginary they each had an individual imaginary container like okay, a relationship has to check all these boxes, it has to do all these things. They did not want all of those things, but a relationship had to have them. And one of the things that they were struggling with was um, spirituality. Another thing was sexuality. And now I'm thinking this actually describes half a dozen different couples I worked with just in the last year. And I don't do a ton of private work. I keep that work very exclusive. So it's almost all of the people I worked with over the last couple years in these tender areas. It's so challenging to fully acknowledge that we struggle in certain areas. We struggle to allow ourselves to let go of what we actually don't. We
Yeah.
can't come to terms, we
Yep.
can't come into alignment, so maybe we let that part of our relationship go, or, um, we reimagine what it even means to be in a relationship, and I think those are maybe that's just 2 different ways of saying the same thing. The the reimagining will often include setting down some things that you previously had taken for granted as, "Yeah, that has to be part of a relationship."
Yeah. So
It
the
just has
these
to. Like, we have to if we're not having a sexual relationship, we're not in a relationship. Or if we're not, engaged in a truly emotional, psycho-spiritual relationship, then we're not in a relationship. Whatever it is for you, we can actually renegotiate all of this, but you also don't have to. Like, conversely, you can also decide, "You know what? I don't want I don't want a relationship with a person who I can't have this particular kind of desire met." But then you got to face that that's you. That's you saying, yeah,
yeah.
if I can't have this kind of connection with you, I don't want a relationship.
Hmm.
I think that takes a fair amount of courage to
It
own that and not make that like, oh, but everybody has sex in their marriage. No, not everybody.
No,
There
not
are
everybody
perfectly
does.
happy sexless marriages.
So I'm hearing you describe the amount of personal responsibility that that these conversations require. Whether you're saying I do want this or I don't want this, you have to be willing to say to say this is what I want.
Yeah, you have to be willing to name
You have to be willing to
to
name it.
name it, and then there's a whole period of time where you're, like, reacclimating to, "Okay, so how could we collaborate on creating something that works for all of us?"
Yeah. Yeah. Because what I like about what you're saying is how that personal responsibility, I want this, I don't want this, um, that can be the start of a conversation about imagining what you want your relationship to look like. Like it doesn't have to be, oh, now I realize I don't want this thing or that I do want this other thing. And those things don't fit into the rules that I have that been carrying around about what a relationship is. So we can't have a relationship. Well, what if
Right.
instead you put the rules down and just look at each of your actual selves and see how you fit together.
I mean, I think this is incredibly difficult though,
Oh yeah.
because most of us are operating our relationships on a set of um, inexplicable, ineffable rules
Mm-hmm.
that we've never actually outlined for ourselves. But like these are the things that we think are normal.
Right.
And one of them is the normal amount of sex to have.
Yep.
I mean, that the number of times I have asked someone how frequently they have sex, which is a lead up to a bunch of other questions, and they have told me the normal amount, just the regular amount.
Yeah.
This also comes up when I'm dating, when I venture back into app dating. Every time I venture back into app dating, somebody will talk about just, liking the regular amount of sex or a lot of sex. And I'm like,
Both of those are equally
I
troublesome
don't know
in
what
that,
you mean. You're going to have to
yeah.
either be way more specific or I don't know, learn how to telepathically give me more information. There is no normal amount of sex. There's no normal type of sex. There's so much
Yeah.
variety here. So when we're talking about desire discrepancy, often it is this mix of all these differences that we aren't even totally sure how to describe to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. So if I can use you as an example,
Always.
it was type and frequency and intensity all going on for you, right?
That was
Okay,
my
so you wanted
experience.
you wanted different types of sex, you wanted different intensities of sex, you wanted different frequency of sex. So in my first marriage, yeah, I wanted a different, I mostly frequency. I was really hung up on frequency. I was the higher desire partner, and I had already sacrificed and said, like, fine, I don't like kissing, I don't like foreplay. Neither of those is true, but I had convinced myself that that was true, so that I could make it about this one simple thing. Okay, let's just boil it down to frequency. Like I thought if I made the discrepancy smaller in like the points of contention in negotiation smaller, that would somehow make the problem easier to solve. But it didn't, because the problem was about our ability to connect,
Mm-hmm.
our ability to actually be with each other as we were. There were a million other problems, but we didn't know how to, either of us, I think you and I, didn't know how to approach with real vulnerable, like, oh, this might, I don't think this is going to work for me. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the other piece of the
Yeah.
of really facing desire discrepancy is, yeah, what if it doesn't work for you? Does that mean that the whole relationship has to get thrown out, or does that mean that you're willing to renegotiate and just bust open all of those unwritten
Yep.
rules you have for yourself? Because those rules are completely made up. They are based in cultural norms, absolutely. But there, there's there's no rule book.
There's no external standard. There's our culture, yes, but they're
And
not.
since we have no sex education, that basically means
Oh,
there's no rules.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
rules. Yikes.
Um
But true.
when
And
you oh, go ahead.
well, you had said, okay, so that you theorized that my experience was that I wasn't getting the type, frequency, or intensity that I wanted. And in retrospect, that's true. In the moment, I wasn't imagining things that to that level of complexity,
Mm,
because in the rules for that relationship that I was in, really the only thing that I could talk about, if which I didn't, was frequency. The
right.
idea that there were intensities and types
Well,
just didn't come up.
I'm guessing that you did talk about frequency a little bit. Like,
Yeah, but not enough to consider it an ongoing conversation, the kind of ongoing conversation that we would have needed to actually get anywhere. All we
Mm,
did was notice it. Not really a conversation so much as a mention,
yeah.
you know?
I mean, noticing is important.
It is. Yep. It's a good
And
first step.
and so when we are avoiding the conversations that are hard for us, because there's no such thing as an objectively hard conversation. It's just about how hard it is for you.
Right.
Because I don't have any trouble talking about sex with you, except when I do, right? Like anything,
Yeah.
we can have
Right.
a hard conversation with anyone about anything. Um, when I think about what it is to have those hard conversations, I also think about how I'm looking for an outcome. I'm hoping for a new agreement. I'm hoping for us to come to some new conclusion that will allow me to get more of what I want while hopefully not feeling manipulative or coercive to
Right.
you. And
Mhm.
this is tender stuff. Um, as
It
we've
is. It can be very tender stuff. And you just said something about looking for a an outcome of a new agreement. Do you know what your old agreement is? Have you actually talked about
right, and be clear about this specific subject,
it? This subject, yeah.
because a lot of us do have some kind of agreement, though not as many people have them, like actually clarified and codified. But we have some agreements, but often this was the unmentionable thing the whole time.
Right.
And I would say in my experience, there was no agreement about sex. There's certainly, and it didn't feel like a thing that was okay to have an agreement about, because
Yeah.
what I wanted was more frequency. And that felt manipulative. Like, just to even say I want more frequency felt like I was being, like I was asking for something that should only be freely offered.
Okay. Yeah. I get okay. And that point that was part of why I never talked about any of that on my side. Yeah, I felt like no, it should be, it should just happen organically.
And I think that might be born a little bit of the pre nascent, before they were even nascent conversations on consent. So
Yeah.
you grew up in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s, and we weren't having consent conversations. I don't remember anyone even using that word.
No.
Certainly not during my teenage years. I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I heard that word, probably my early 30s. So I think that, like, coming of age and setting our sexual scripts at a time when we just didn't have language to talk about consent, but I think we did want to behave kindly to our partners. And so then, yeah, like instead of offering, we decide not to ask. Like if it's not being freely offered, we decide not to ask because that's the
Yeah.
only thing to do,
I
because we can't get consent any other way. Because
right.
basically, if the sex doesn't just fall on us, then we might be doing something wrong. And I was at an advantage there. So as a cisgender woman, a relatively small-bodied cisgender woman in a monogamous marriage at the time, I was much less likely to be accused of being coercive or worse
Mhm.
in pressuring someone for sex. So I did. I definitely pressured for sex. And I in ways that I would never do now. I had no idea that I had no idea what that meant to be putting that pressure on someone. But also on the other end of that spectrum, you never did. And
Yeah.
you never pressured, you never asked.
Mhm.
And so we were at opposite ends of a spectrum,
Yep.
neither of which is actually giving our partners the full autonomy that they
That's
deserve
yes.
and not honoring our actual needs.
Mhm.
And that, to me, I still see that. I see that playing out all the like just constantly. And I think it plays out within us as well. This isn't just an inter-partner thing. This is an intrapersonal thing where I may have parts that are so on board for wanting lots of sex, and then I have other parts of me that are like tangled up, twisted in shame, struggling with religious guilt, purity culture, a million different reasons, or shame about my kinks, or confusion about what my kinks means or my attraction means.
Yeah.
And if all that's going on inside, I can have desire discrepancy happening in here. So if you want to go to parts theory or complex theory, like if I've got that going on in here, and now I come to you, it is so much easier for me to project all of that shame and bullshit and all of that out onto you,
Yeah.
and co-create a situation where basically we are having a constant low level argument about desire, because it keeps the whole system in check. Like okay, we'll just kind of be in an ongoing because we aren't dealing with our
Yeah.
inside stuff either. I'm not dealing with the fact that I do have all of this pleasure phobia. I do have sex negative attitudes. I do have problems understanding what I need or want sexually, what or how to even talk about that. Projecting onto my partner that they don't want sex is one way to control that, to manage that pain.
So this is this isn't quite where I thought this conversation was going to end up going, but I mean, it does. An important part of desire mismatch is consent. I mean, if there's a desire mismatch, it means somebody doesn't want frequency, type, intensity to the same level that somebody else does, which means you need to have a consent conversation about what you're actually going to be doing. And that consent runs through all of it. Right down to what you were just saying about okay, so do I, even just talking about it, like can we talk about this?
And
Yes
then
or
what
no?
words can we
And what
use?
words can we
So,
use?
there's actually I have a whole handout on, like, what words are okay for you?
Yeah.
Do you have some words that are just like a no-fly zone for you? Like, please don't use these words. Yeah, just getting into the most rudimentary
Hmm.
pieces of, yep, can we talk about sex? Okay. What words can we use, or what words are going to cause some kind of response that I can't manage? And that doesn't mean I shouldn't or can't work on that trigger response, but like what words might shut me down.
Yeah.
And then what are we talking about? Because we haven't even touched the fact that we haven't even
Yeah.
defined what
You haven't
sex
even talked about
is.
what sex is. Uh-huh.
Like, what
And
does that even mean?
so
Or
now,
kink for that matter. What
uh-huh.
does kink mean? There is no arbiter of what these things are.
So these are complex conversations without question. And every single little bitty part of these complicated conversations are opportunities to learn more about each other uh, at a at as deep a level as you're willing to go,
And to learn about yourself.
and in the process, learn about yourself so that your partner can learn about you. And
And
it's
I,
just
I mean, that
it's
but you know what? If I were to go back in time, I actually I feel very complete and happy that I am no longer with my first spouse. We were not suited for each other in a bunch of ways, but more importantly, the me who exists now couldn't exist in that context. It just was not possible. And and yet, if I had challenged myself to have these conversations for me, entirely like
yeah.
for me, so I could know myself, he would have benefited. That's true. But it would have been such a gift to myself to say, yeah, it is breaking the unwritten rules of relationship for me to insist that we have these conversations, but I got to know me. And if my partner then really wasn't available to have those conversations, and I did push for the conversations, but he wasn't available for them, I wish I hadn't stopped the self-discovery, because
Hmm.
like squoze that, I don't know the right word, like I squished that discovery process down to try to make it about getting something from him.
Ah, I
It
see.
wasn't about that.
Yeah,
It was
when
never about that. I didn't
mhm,
know what I wanted, what I needed. I didn't know it was so much easier for me to make it about what he wouldn't give me. And it's so irrelevant. That just feels so silly. From this perspective, 15 years later, I'm like, that's just who cares? It just doesn't matter. But at the top, but it does matter to me that I didn't know. My 30-year-old self didn't know what she wanted. Not really. Should she just reduced it down to like frequency of fucking? Like, really? What? That doesn't even make any sense by the metric that this grown up person that I am now is. I wonder what I'll think about that in 15 years.
right?
I wonder
Yeah,
what right
I'm
now I'm like, that wasn't even the question.
So it's a conversation that, even honestly, so what you're describing is a conversation that doesn't need to be started because there's a desire mismatch. It's
No,
just an investigation about desires, about, how all this works
right?
for yourself and your partners.
And, at the beginning of the conversation, I started saying, like, it could also be about the structure. And we didn't really go into that. We could have another separate conversation about when the desire mismatch is about the number of partners
Mhm.
that you want to have, that like, or whether you want to be polyamorous, or whether you're maybe okay with swinging but not okay with polyamory, whatever that is. Um, but it is all going to revolve around getting clear on what your assumptions are. So that's all individuation work. All of that, like understanding what rules you've been abiding by because you think some unconscious aspects of you think that's just what's normal. That's just what is. And if you do want to negotiate around your sex life, those are important conversations to have. If you want to negotiate around your relationship structure, that's a huge gift to your partner, but it might not feel like it to them. So let's remember that when you said this is an
Yeah,
ongoing conversation, yeah, these conversations sometimes take years
right. Yeah.
to really unpack everything that was unsaid. So depending on especially how established your relationship norms are, I mean, it's making me think of what I used to say when I was a childbirth doula about, took you 9 months to grow a baby. It's going to take 9 months to start feeling like you have your legs back and your self back and like, oh, who am I now? Right. The longer those problems brood, the longer it will take to figure out, okay, who am I now? And I think that's the norm. That's
That's the norm.
completely
Mhm.
normal. Thanks for having a complicated and nuanced conversation with me. I want to pick this up and have a follow-up
We will,
conversation
for
about
sure.
shifting relationship structures and the desire discrepancy that can be.
All right. Thank you.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com. And find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.